On this channel, $1 Million Made Easy, we love to run numbers for people. We also like to point out different concepts, certain definitions. For example, what's the difference between your average amount and your median amount? I recently saw this retirement savings by age, how much everybody has, both the median amount and the average amount. I want to look specific at this age 55 to 64. Look at that. It says the average is 538,000, but the median's only 185,000. What's the difference between these two? Why is there such a huge discrepancy here? Obviously, 538,000 going into retirement if you're 64 would be in great shape, but 185 would be a little bit iffy. So let's look at just a set of numbers, just hypothetical numbers here. This actually, if you had 11 people and these were the different amounts they had, what happens is that if you have some couple people that really have a high amount, it really raises the average. But here's what the average is, going down through. If you take all the average of all these 11, you're going to come up with 538,000. I actually threw a 538,000 in there, but the median is only 185,000. In other words, half the people have more than 185,000. Right here, 5 of them. Half the people have less than 185,000. There they are right there. So the median is 185,000, but the average is 538,000. So obviously 538,000 is raised immensely by these two high net worth individuals right here. I did run one at 538,000. I put that in there. I could make any of these numbers you want, but I wanted to explain the difference between a median and average. But I also want to go ahead and do one step further to show you what we do on this channel. Let's say somebody does have that 538,000. They're 64 years old, 538,000. 538,000. And they figure they need $4,500 a month for their expenses, but they're going to get Social Security. They're 64 years old. They're going to take it at 64. We could change any of these numbers, by the way. We can change the asset allocation, COLAs, and all that. But I'm just going to show you what this would amount to. How many times in the last 100 years would you have a problem if we had returns like we've had in the last 100 years? What if we run into a bad decade like the 1930s or the 2000s with all these down years, consecutive down years? What if we have good decades? We want to run the numbers for every possible scenario within this range of what's happened in the last 100 years. So I'm going to go ahead and update this, show you how many times the last 100 years, and the returns are going to be over here, the 10, 20, and 30 years. This is how much you'd have after these periods of time, withdrawing $4,500 a month, giving yourself a 3% COLA, and Social Security kicking in immediately. So in other words, you don't need the 4,500 totally coming from your nest egg. You only need 4,500 minus the 1,900, which would be 2,600, which would be a percentage withdrawal rate of 5.8%. And when you have much more than 4%, we've done this many, many times, that's when you run into some issues. In this case, 9% of the time you run out of money in 20 years. This is a 20-year column. So 91% of the time you'd be just fine. This is the actual graph. Look at the numbers. You'd have 2 million, 4 million. So almost every scenario you'd be fine, except 9% of the time it's a little bit troubling because you're running out of money. And this yellow here means you're actually going in the wrong direction. So in 1925, you have less than what you had in a 10-year period. And some of that can be problematic. For example, in 1937, you're going in the wrong direction, so that by 19, let's click on 1937, when do you actually run out of money? Given this scenario, running out of money right in 20 years. You got 31,000 left. You can't make it to the 21st year, but that's how this color coding works for this chart. Let me go down a little bit farther. Looks like 1955, you were going in the wrong direction, but look, it went back up because you had some really good years after that first 20-year period. That's what we do on this channel. We run different numbers, but what could you do differently? What could you do differently if you're concerned about this 9%? Again, you have a 91% success rate, but what happens if you would just go down to 4,000 a month, 4,500 to 4,000. Well, this changes 9% very much. That's going to be a 4.68% withdrawal rate, about 1% lower than what we did with the 4,500. How does it look then? Again, we're just running different scenarios. You got 5% of the time you're running out of money, most of those during the Depression years. What happens if you wouldn't leave it all in the S&P 500? What happens if you change your asset allocation? That's what we do on this channel, show you what you can do. Let's do a 70-30 asset allocation. 70% stay in the S&P 500 because you want to be able to benefit from these gains. But if you have 100% in there, you could run out of money before you even get to these years, so you could benefit from these positive years. Look at 1954 and 1955, up 52, up 31. You want to be able to have your money last that long. So let's go ahead and update this. Right now we got a 5% failure rate. Remember, we went from 4,500 to 4,000, went from a 5 point, whatever it was, 6% withdrawal rate to a 4.68. But we're also doing a 70-30 split. Now the only time you have a problem is 2% of the time. Again, 1929 and 1930 was such a horrible stretch of down years, consecutive down years. That's what really caused the problem. But every other scenario, if you look at the graph here, you're in great shape, except possibly the year 2000 here. But every other scenario, you are just fine. But that's what we do on this channel. We run numbers for people. We really like to see people stay close to the 4% rule, and you start doing changing your asset allocation. That can help also. It took it from 5% failure rate to only a 2% failure rate. If you remember, right here, it's 5%. If we left it all in the S&P 500, which nobody would recommend that, because when the market's going down, you want the money coming out of the cash reserve account. You want to have a cash reserve account. The money can come out of that. So it's 5% with all of it staying in the S&P 500. And if you go to 30% asset allocation, just 2%, which is a lot more comfortable in a lot of people's minds, you would think. Again, this is looking at just 538,000. You're getting your Social Security. You only need to take 2,100 out of your nest egg rather than the 4,000 that would run you out of money even quicker. But hopefully this makes sense to you. Again, just understanding what the difference between median and average is can be very important to understand that, because people can look at this and say, what in the world's going on here? Of course I want this one. How come people have this right here? Because this kind of explains it with just you can have a couple really high-end, high net worth individuals that can really raise this average. You really want to look at the median here, which in this case I realized I did, and I was looking at this right here. But again, if somebody's 55 years old and has 185,000, they've got almost 10 years to build that up to a higher amount, hopefully getting closer to this amount right here. But that's what we do on this channel. We run numbers for people. It's called $1 Million Made Easy. Please consider subscribing. Please share this channel with others. Let them know that we're running numbers for anybody. And thanks for watching.